thank you. I'm sitting down because that's what they told me to do. And I just thought you all might wonder why you're sitting down. And another thing that I never tell anybody, and I notice it wasn't taught, is that they always say, turn your phone off. But I wouldn't. I mean, if you're my age, you don't, because you've got a mother or you've got a brother or you've got a friend. And I have a mother, my mother's gone, but I have a friend who is quite ill right now. And I have a son who, in the middle of my talk this afternoon, called me. And he called to tell me that he's engaged. He is going to get married. I really like her, so I'm glad. I didn't like his first wife, so I really like her. And what I really want to do, they haven't decided, but you know, we always give the women away, as if the women were what, free or something? And no, I want to give Thomas away. I think that I think it's time that we. I do. I think it's time that we walk the men down the hall. So I'm very pleased for him, and you know, I hope that if he's not happy, that he shuts up about it. That he's at his age, just settle down. What the hell, you know, get rid of it. So I was glad about that. But I know that phones ring is what I was. That's a long way of saying phones ring because people have things, and you all are not kids. Some of you are young, but you're not kids. So there may be a reason your phone rings. It won't bother me, because my phone rings, and so I have to keep mine going. And my good friend, whom I love so much, if you read children's literature, his name is Ashley Bryan, and I worked with Ashley. We did 2 books together. Ashley was so wonderful, and he was only 96, and I kept my. Well, you know, you get into that habit of just and only. You know, he was just 96, he was only 96, and I had to keep my phone on because we knew that Ashley was passing. And I wanted to talk to him if he could talk. He did, of course, pass, and we went to his funeral. But you know, 96 is not so old. And it used to be that 96 is old. Now people 101 are riding bicycles, and you know, they really are. And with any luck, doing drugs. Because at 101, you ought to be able. I really think you should. You know, I don't do drugs, but I'm looking forward to being in my late 90s and, you know, sniffing some cocaine and seeing what it is. I guess I shouldn't say it like that, but obviously the kids don't know what to do with it, because you see what they're doing. They're either committing suicide or killing somebody. But it seems like we old people ought to, if drugs are that much fun, we ought to be able to enjoy it. Yeah, and there ought to be a discount. You know what I'm saying? That you ought to be able to take your AARP and go into, you know, like, hey, no, I'm old, give me, you know. But nobody listens to me. I am and I'll just mention this and I'll stop, but I am a Fisk University graduate. And I'm so proud that we now have a, Fisk is right down the street in Nashville, but we now have a women's gymnastic team. And I'm so happy for Fisk, because Fisk was the first university that was male and female. And we were, and I guess we still are, we are a literary arts school. My grandfather graduated Fisk in 1905, and he was a Latin scholar. So when I went to Fisk, I'm a history major, I wanted to do that. But I met the Queen, and I am truly sorry that she's gone, because the world is going to be different when, it's just going to be a different world without Elizabeth. And it's not that I'm against Charles, but we're not going to have another woman, for almost another century, because then there'll be, all things being equal, Charles, then William, then George. And we don't know what George is going to have, but that's a long time, and they live a long time. So, you know, you're looking at 100 years or so. You know, well, Charles is going to die before that, because he has been. He's been sweating it out, waiting on his mom to die. But William is going to live a long time, and George is going to live a long time. And so it's going to be a long time before we have another woman who could do what Elizabeth did. Your provost mentioned the poem that I read for the tragedy, there's no other word, at Virginia Tech, we had 32 students to be shot to death and many more to be injured. And that's a hard thing to do. Let me just start with that. So when the president's secretary, her name is Sandy Smith, when Sandy called me, she said, Nick, you have to end convocation. And so I'm at home wondering, well, how do you end convocation? It's going to, that's going to be a rough thing. And I knew some of the students and even those that I didn't know. It's just sad. So I knew I needed to write something because I didn't want to just stand up in front of everybody and cry, which is pretty much what I wanted to do. We had convocation in our thing, which is like 10,000 people, and that was okay because I thought they were Virginia Tech. But I hadn't thought about the fact that we were going international. And I certainly hadn't thought about the fact that the Queen was a part of my audience. And so when she came to Richmond, which was about a couple of months later, this is one of her people asked my people, would I come over to, she'd like to meet me. And I was like, whoa, are you kidding? Of course I'd like to meet the Queen. And so I went over to Richmond, and it was just, I still don't know if I believe it or not when she said, I've enjoyed your poetry over the years. I have a hard time thinking of Queen Elizabeth reading, Nikki, can you kill, can you, so when I think of some of my poetry, I can't imagine she was reading. But nonetheless, it was, I thought, very kind of her. But I'm taller than the Queen. I thought you should see that. I'm 5'2", and she's about 4'11", but you couldn't tell that, but I'm taller than the Queen. And having met a lot of famous people, which was my luck, I guess, I wanted to step in front of Queen Elizabeth because I wanted to get her attention. And so in stepping in front of, you can do that. You just step in, you can do that with anybody you meet that's famous. If you just step in front, don't reach for them, anything that'll make them nervous, just step. And that made her have to look up. And I said, ma'am, I'm a graduate of Fisk University. And if it's one thing that I'll never forget, she says, oh. I'm sure she'll think, what the hell do I care? Oh. And I said, yes, ma'am, your great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, invited the Fisk singers to England, and they stayed for a year. And she awarded them 50,000 pounds, which she did, which is not, pounds is not the same as dollars. I said, and she awarded them 50,000 pounds, which saved my school from bankruptcy, and I was able to graduate. And she said, oh, I didn't know that. I'm sure she didn't, because it's not the kind of thing, somebody would have told her. And I said, yes, ma'am, I thought you might not. And no, I thought she was really cool. I think the world has lost something. And I stepped back because you want to give her space. I just wanted her to hear that there's a relationship between all of us, between blacks and whites, between America and England. There's a lot of relationships that sometimes we don't know or we don't pay attention to. And meeting the Queen was nice. I've never met Charles. I doubt that I will. And I don't have any reason to. But I really, well, he's not his mother. But I really would like to see a better relationship of, for example, Fisk. And now we have, then I'll quit talking about Fisk, but now we have a women's gymnastic team. And I really wish that Fisk would be a girls' school, that it would just change, because we don't have that many men at Fisk. And if we became a girls' school, then we could just go and beg. We'd just get on our hands and knees and beg Richard Williams to come and do our tennis team. And well, look at what he did with Venus and Serena. And then we'll just take it and somebody says, well, what about the Jubilee Singers? Well, the advantage of the Jubilee Singers is that Meharry is across the street, Vanderbilt is down the street, Belmont is about 2 blocks over, Tennessee State. We can always get men. If you have a bunch of pretty women, you can always get you can always get the men. And Fisk is, I think it's ego that Fisk isn't thinking about what should our relationship be and how do we go into the future, because you can't keep doing the same damn things you've been doing all the time because it's not working. And so we're making some, and I'm not, I want to be nice about it, but we need to make changes. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think that we have to all think about the changes that we need to make. And our founding fathers made a change that said, we're leaving England and we're going to start a nation, and we're going to believe that all men are created equal. Now, we know that they meant and women. We know that. And we know the little prick John Adams, and he was a prick. You know he was. And so we know that his wife is in the kitchen, but his wife doesn't cook. She has a cook, she has a slave, because they all own slaves. Everybody owns slaves. So you can't get mad about people having slaves, because everybody had a slave. If you didn't have a slave, you were pitiful. Everybody had a slave. And so I'm sure that her slave said, man, don't forget about the women. Now, she was probably talking about black women, but Mrs. Adams said to John, don't forget the ladies. That's history. And we know that when they came down to Philadelphia to discuss how they're going to make America, one of the things that John said, and I will always love Benjamin Franklin for this, is that if we're going to be the fathers of a nation, we're going to have to give up our black mistresses. And Benjamin Franklin said, if we have a choice between our black mistresses and a nation, we're going to keep the black mistresses. I didn't make that up. That's what Benjamin Franklin said. That's why they wouldn't let him be president. But he told the truth, because Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, what did they have? And you start to look at the history and you think, we're all connected. And of course, one of the things you love about rich people is that the rich men didn't want their wives' breasts to be messed up, so they got pregnant. But when they had the baby, what did they do? They said, go down into the slave quarters and find out who's had a baby so that they can have that milk from that baby. Now, this is history, right? And they go down. Now, I know, as do you, you are what you eat. That's reality. So there's nobody that isn't a part of everybody. I'm a native Tennessean. I was born there. During the age of segregation, when you couldn't go to the same amusement park or the same movie theater, when the white guys would cruise up and down the streets and call out to you, when the black guys were afraid of being lynched. But we went to church each Sunday and we sang a precious song, and we found a way to not only to survive, but to thrive and believe and hope. I'm a native Tennessean. I was born there, but I was only 2 months old when my mother and father moved my sister and me to Cincinnati during the age of segregation, when Dow drugstores wouldn't serve us, when the neighborhoods were redlined, but at least mommy could get a job teaching and daddy could get a job behind a desk. And after all, if you are a college graduate, that's the least you can expect. Though the Pullman Porters took us south each summer and watched over us with an unfailing faith and got us from there to here. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee. I was born there, in the only state in rebellion that didn't have to undergo Reconstruction, in the volunteer state that sent as many for one side as another, in an area where if I just had to have a car break down, I would prefer any holler to any city neighborhood, but there was no work and no way. And after all, the chronic angers that flared and chased that. And after all, I don't see well. And all the chronic angers that flared chased us to Ohio. We were not Liza crossing the river, just 4 people, 2 in love and 2 who were loved, who needed to put a rest to the rage. But the rage stayed, and someone had to go. I chose me, but I was born there, so the going was a coming. I'm a native Tennessean. I take no joy in Davy Crockett, nor Jim Bowie. They were wrong to be at the Alamo. They were wrong to fight for the theft. I love James Agee. I love Thunder Road, though I, a native Tennessean, was not allowed to play a bit part when the crew came to town to film the movie. Ingrid Bergman and Anthony Quinn came to take a walk in the spring rain. And despite it all, unlike Andrew Jackson, at least he knew the big guys were wrong. I'm a native Tennessean. I graduated Fisk University in Nashville. I know that the freedmen paid for that school. Nobody gave them anything. Pennies and nickels and prayer and determination. The freedmen paid for it, and many others. I know the American Missionary Society took the money the Jubilee Singers made to save Fisk and used it for other purposes. I know the American Missionary Society was wrong. I was educated by the singers of those songs. I love those songs. How can I not love Nashville? How could I not love Dinah Shore, who invited the Jubilee Singers to sing at the Grand Ole Opry, then had to hear the rumors? She sang on, sang until she saw the USA in her Chevrolet. I once saw her on a plane. I was going to the cabin. She was in first class. I said, hey. She smiled and said, hey, back. When I got Georgia on my mind, I rode the Chattanooga choo-choo to Lookout Mountain. I saw Memphis and was enchanted. From the mighty Mississippi gracefully turning all red to Bill Street beats at midnight. All those blues from so many bloods decided to turn my blues to Memphis gold. W.C. Handy, Bobby Blue Bland, B.B. King, the late great Johnny Ace, stacks and stacks of music. American music. The Athens from the South held Tennessee music. But Memphis put the tears to the lonely and crossed over. Everyone wants to rock to my rhythm. I am Memphis. I heard the shots that took Martin. I know who killed the king. I'm a native Tennessean. I know what it is to be free. I am singing the country blues. I am whittling a wooden doll. I am underground mining coal. I am running moonshine. I'm a white boy with a banjo, native to West Africa. I am a black boy with a twang, native to the hills. I am smart. I am cool. I am unafraid. I am free. Yeah, I'm a native Tennessean. I've been having trouble with, I think I need a new pair of glasses. And then it's warm in here. Am I the only person warm in here? And most of these I should know somewhat. And I'm not complaining, so you don't have to do anything, but the sweat was coming. But speaking of that, I was talking earlier, we were laughing about one of the great women, of course, of America, which we all know because she's the only woman to lay in state. If you're ever on Jeopardy, that's the answer, is Rosa Parks. She was the only woman to ever lay in state. We've never had another woman. I doubt that we ever will again. And I was invited, which was just very lucky, I was invited to write a poem about Mrs. Parks for one of the anniversaries. And you just get lucky like that. I happen to have known Mrs. Parks. And again, you're just lucky that you happen to know people. And one of the things that I think works for people who know me is that I never used anybody. So in knowing many of the famous people that I knew, I still haven't had anything to say about them because it's none of anybody's business. And the letters that we exchanged are none of anybody's business because otherwise you have no privacy. But when Miss Parks had to move up to Detroit, as you know, because they were threatening her life and Mr. Parks' life. And by the way, there's going to be a book, and not mine, but someone is writing a book on the husbands of the civil rights workers. And it's really, it was time because I think the greatest husband of all, of course, was Daddy Hamer, Fannie Lou Hamer's husband, because he had a lot to just, it had to just kill him all the time, that what his wife was going through. But Mr. Parks, Ray Parks, was a wonderful man. And of course, you have a lot of the men. We remember somehow the women, and maybe not as many of the women as we should, because we don't know what the women were thinking when their husbands are leaving. We don't know what Coretta was thinking, and I didn't know Mrs. Parks. Coretta Scott. I knew who she was. I didn't know. But she had to be scared every time Martin left the house because she didn't know when he was not going to come home. And one day, he didn't. These are things we know. But Mrs. Parks was up, and she and Raymond were up in Detroit. And so when you go up in Detroit, which was the center, one Motown was there, so all of the music is going to be there, even though my sorority sister, Aretha Franklin, Israel Knight. Aretha knew not to go with Motown. She knew that wouldn't work for her, so she ended up going with Columbia and then Atlantic. But nonetheless, everybody went to Detroit Broadside Press was there and everything. So you'd go up and you'd stop in to see Mrs. Parks. And we were sitting and talking. I was sharing this earlier. We were sitting talking. I'm a coffee drinker, and Mrs. Parks a tea drinker. And I had to say it, we were just, because it's no point in asking her, how did you feel when you got arrested? Some of that crap that people ask you and you wonder what the hell is wrong with you. you really don't. And I just said to her, Miss Parks, when I think about your life, I'm just always amazed that you only made one mistake. And I'll never forget it. Her face just kind of dropped, because she was very cool, always a very cool woman. Her face just kind of dropped. And she said, well, what was that, baby? And I said, you and AKA. And because she should have gone Delta, we all know that, but she did. Most of you don't know that, what I'm talking about, but for those of you who don't, I'm sorry, but most of you do. And, no, she went AKA, but AKAs have a lot. They have the vice president, Toni Morrison was an AKA. A lot of people went AKA, and we like y'all. You're the mama, so you're good. But if 19 women of Delta had not decided we're not, the AKA said we're not going to march behind Susan B. Anthony, because Miss Anthony was a racist, and these are things you know. And she had said, I'm not going to march with any Negroes. And the AKAs, I think rightfully said, well, we're not marching behind her. But the 19 women of Delta that became Delta Sigma Theta said, it doesn't matter where we march. It's more important that we march. And that vote that ultimately we have, that if I may, you must do that. You must get out and vote. I am not... I'm not in any way trying to tell you how or who or what. I really am not. But whatever you do, you must vote. Don't let people silence you. Because we have words, and words sometimes are all that we have, and I think that's important. But I was invited. I'm not always invited to write poems, but I have been invited to do a couple of them. And I was invited to write a poem for Mrs. Parks. And it's really funny. I mean, not ha-ha. But I realized that to write a poem for Rosa Parks, we had to start, if I may, at the beginning. And if any of you are writers or history majors, the most important unknown people, period, in Black history are Pullman Porters. And we forget how important the Pullman Porters were, because nobody has trains anymore, so many of you don't know trains, but there used to be a thing called trains. They did. And there were people called red caps who helped get you on the train. Now, the trains were segregated, which is fine by me, but you got on the train, and then the Pullman Porters are the ones who looked out for you. And I knew that I couldn't start that. I couldn't start a poem for Rosa without dealing with the Pullman Porters, because the Pullman Porters are going to start with, of course, Emmett Till. And when we get to Emmett, that's going to be the beginning. Did I say that badly? I didn't mean to. This is for the Pullman Porters, who organized when people said they couldn't, and carried the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender to Black Americans in the South so that they would know they were not alone. This is for the Pullman Porters who helped Thurgood Marshall go south and come back north to fight the fight that resulted in Brown versus the Board of Education. Because even though Kansas is west, and even though Topeka is the birthplace of Gwendolyn Brooks, who wrote the powerful "The Chicago Defender Sends a Man to Little Rock," it was the Pullman Porters who whispered to the traveling men, both the blues men and the race men, so that they would know what was going on. This is for the Pullman Porters who smiled like they were happy and laughed like they were tickled when some folks were around, and who silently rejoiced in 1954 when the Supreme Court announced its 9-0 decision that separate is inherently unequal. This is for the Pullman Porters who smiled and welcomed a 14-year-old boy onto his train in 1955. They noticed his slight limp that he tried to disguise with a doo-wop walk. They noticed his stutter and probably understood why his mother wanted him out of Chicago during the summer when school was out. 14-year-old Black boys with limps and stutters are apt to try to prove themselves in dangerous ways when mothers aren't around to look after them. So this is for the Pullman Porters who looked over that 4-year-old while the train rolled the reverse of the Blues Highway from Chicago to St. Louis to Memphis to Mississippi. This is for the men who kept him safe. And if Emmett Till had been able to stay on the train all summer, he would have maybe grown a bit of a paunch, certainly lost his hair, probably have worn bifocals, and bounced his grandchildren on his knee, telling them about his summer riding the rails. But he had to get off that train and ended up in Money, Mississippi, and was horribly, brutally, inexcusably, and unacceptably murdered. This is for the Pullman Porters who, when the sheriff was trying to get that body secretly buried, got Emmett's body on the northbound train, got his body home to Chicago, where his mother said, "I want the world to see what they did to my boy." And this is for all the mothers who cried, and this is for all the people who said, "Never again." And this is about Rosa Parks, whose feet were not so tired. It had been, after all, an ordinary day until the bus drivers gave her the opportunity to make history. This is about Mrs. Rosa Parks from Montgomery, Alabama, who was also the field secretary of the NAACP. This is about the moment Rosa Parks shouldered her cross, put her worldly goods aside, and was willing to sacrifice her life so that that young man in Money, Mississippi, who had been so well protected by the Pullman Porters, would not have died in vain. When Mrs. Parks said no, a passionate movement was begun. No longer would there be a reliance on the law, there was a higher law. When Mrs. Parks brought that light of hers to expose the evil of the system, the sun came and rested on her shoulders, bringing the light of truth. Others would follow. Others would follow Mrs. Parks. 4 young men in Greensboro, North Carolina, would also say no. Great voices would be raised, singing the praises of God and exhorting us to forgive those who trespass against us. But it was the Pullman Porters who safely got Emmett to his granduncle. And it was Mrs. Parks who could not stand that death. And not being able to stand it, she sat back down. Thank you. This was what I've been reading to you ladies, the period that I went through in my writing. This is for all the young writers in the room, where I was just writing long poems. And sometimes you go through a period, and you've seen, E.E. Cummins, and he's going to write poems 4 lines. And then you get somebody like me, and I'm just writing page after page after page. And I enjoy this. I'm not a crier. I didn't learn to cry until I was really old, till my mother had passed. And that's because my father, was an idiot. And he was. The older I get, the more I try to understand him, but they're all gone, so it's hard to understand, because you just can't hit somebody you love. They're just illogical. You don't hit your dog, and you don't hit your children, you don't hit your wife. It's illogical. And he had a bad habit of doing that. And so I finally realized I couldn't live with him anymore. And I moved and lived with my grandparents, which was lucky. I think that God made grandparents. I just think grandmothers are the nicest people on earth. And if you read, some of you who are interested in being a writer, I'm lazy now, I'm 79, and I'm not going to do the research that should be done. But if you ever look at, for example, the fairy tales, and you look at the spirituals, you're going to find that they both do the same thing. They look at the grandmothers. Both of them look at somebody else. It's very important. And we were talking earlier today about Little Red Riding Hood, and nobody ever remembers what did she do. And what her mother did was give her. This was during the Red period when everybody was dying, and her mother gave her. I'm sure it was hard, because people still eat hard bread, and the dried meat, and put it in a basket and sent her to her grandmother, because she knew her grandmother would take care of her. We never find out what happened to her mother, but we know that her mother died. Her mother died of scarlet fever, or whatever it was. Her mother died, and nobody thinks, well, somebody should write, and maybe I should, or try to. Somebody should write about her mother, because it's not easy to send your kid away. It's not easy to do that. But she wanted her daughter to have a chance. Now, we try to make a fool out of Little Red Riding Hood, because we try to say, oh, as she was going, she stopped in the woods and the wolf came along. I can't believe that. I can't believe that my mother would have said to me, go to your grandmother, which she didn't, but if she had, I can't believe that I would have stopped. Some damn wolf would have come along. And I just can't see it now. I would say, yeah, grandmother lives around the block and she keeps the door open. I mean, I can't believe that. And so we try to make a fool out of Little Red Riding Hood when she was only doing what her mother said. But I know that there is a jealousy, and I don't think we can get around that, of the older, I don't know how old, but the men at that point didn't like the old women taking care of the children, of the girls particularly. And we know that they decided that the women in the farce were witches. And we know that they went in and burned them up. We know that they went in and killed them. And there's some history there that has to be dealt with, because I think it's incredible. I think we have to look at it, because everybody tries to make, all of them, they try to make Snow White. You know, how come Snow White was there with the 7 dwarfs? Because the 7 dwarfs would take care of her. She cleaned their house, they went out and dug. And we know that the 7 dwarfs, if you ever look at them, no matter what Disney says, they all died of tuberculosis. They did, because we're here in Appalachia. You're around coal. You know, almost all of us know somebody had lung problem. They died because they were there digging the coal out so that other people could be comfortable. So we need to talk about that. We need to find out what was being said by people who were not allowed to read and who had no books to be able to write, but they had to tell their daughters, this is what I want you to be careful of. This is what I want you to get through. We know that, what's her name, that other one, not Snow White, the one that got pregnant. And, and she, well, that's what woke her up. She was asleep, remember? And what woke her up was not that the prince came along. They always say it now, oh, the prince came along and kissed her. That's not what he did to her. She got, it's not. That's a fact, you know that. She woke up when she had the baby, right? And there is connection. Black enslaved people, we could not read nor write. And people try to act like, well, you were not educated. So it's not true. We passed our story along with the spirituals. And we try to tell people the same thing. And somehow, some of you who are history majors are interested, you'll see the connection between folk tales and spiritual, because there is connection. And it's an important connection because it says we are all a part of the same thing. And I think things like that are important. I'm 79, so I'm lazy, and I was late to really put it together in the way that I understand now. But scarlet fever is what I was trying to think of. And that's why, you have the Red Cross. Because if you had it, you put a red cross on your house so that people wouldn't come in, which is why she is, by the way, Little Red Riding Hood. If she had been Little Blue Riding Hood, something else would have happened to her. But nobody is going to touch a Little Red. It's a lot of interesting things going on. Human beings are sad, and no, we are a sad group, and I wish us well. Good luck. No, we're pitiful. We keep doing the same dumb over and over and over again, and everybody doesn't seem to understand it. I wrote a poem for my mother, and that was a long thing for my mother. And there are things that I still and I'll never understand. And it's not for me to understand because it's none of my business. And I think the smartest thing that I learned, and I was about 12 years old, was that some things are none of my business, and the less I have to try to figure it out, the happier we're all going to be. And the reason when my father had a stroke, my mother called me. I was sharing it early, but my mom called me, and she said, your father's in the hospital, he had a stroke. Well, I knew she didn't call to tell me because I didn't care. And I had a sister who lived in Seattle, and I knew she didn't call. Her name was Gary. I knew she didn't call Gary. She called me because she needed a daughter. And I do want to just take a minute to say there's nothing on earth as precious as a daughter, because that's who you call when you need a friend. And we have to keep that in mind. I have a son, and I like him. I really do. I do. But daughters are very, very special. And when I heard Mommy's voice, I knew she needed something, so I packed. I was living in New York. I packed up and went home. And the reason my mother and I got along till the day she died was that neither one of us ever asked anybody, either one of us, about our business. And it made it very easy for us to get along. And the one thing I hate, I have to admit that, is I hate an opinion. I really hate opinion. You know, people say, oh, you want to know what I think? Well, if I had wanted to know what you think, I would have asked you. No, I don't want to know what you think. And the reason that Mommy and I got along was that that sentence never passed between us. I didn't care what she thought, and she didn't care what I thought. And we got along. And I lived with her for almost 20 years, and then she has passed. But I really, don't you just hate an opinion? People come up to you, you barely know their asses, and they're sitting there, you know. You wouldn't know what I think. No, go deal with your own business. I wrote a poem that I wanted to share because mothers and grandmothers are always, they're not telling us what they think, but they're always saying, if you want to, you can do it. And if you do something that they don't like, they're not the ones complaining. They have nothing to say to you. So we are the ones. We're the single mothers. We take the babies home. They don't have any crap to say about, I told you he was no good. None of that. They welcome you and your baby. They do a thing. And so I wrote a eulogy. What we miss. The smell of evening in Paris, or sometimes Chanel No. 5. The bits of face powder left on the dressing table. The little tubes of tasteful, not quite trashy, but still very hip red lipstick. The almost empty bottles of off-pink fingernail polish. We miss the old fan oscillating and the grunt of the girdle resisting its chore. The smell of Dixie peach waiting for the hot iron to do its touch-up. We miss the instructions. I have to go to the church meeting, and you have to heat up the dinner. I left it on the stove, and don't stand in front of the windows, and don't hang on the telephone if you know the voice right away, and I'll be back as soon as I can. And absolutely, we will miss the click of the heels on the sidewalk as they hurried off, proud, angry, determined, urging us on. What we miss, the excited chatter, spreading the good news of victory or the horrible news of setback, always wondering why, questioning when, hoping now, or at least soon. We miss the gathering of the book club, the garden club, the Delta Alpha Zeta sorority missionary society, the quilting bee, the Wednesday night prayer group, the voices lifted in prayer or song or irritation, calling for a better tomorrow, whatever better might be. But knowing whatever better is a change from that which cannot be tolerated. So tomorrow must be sought, defined, embraced, and prepared for. And those voices from those women urged us on. What we understood, that women had to work at home and at jobs, then give back for reading hour at the library or Girl Scouts or Tri-High-Y, then raise money for city kids to go to camp in the country and country kids to see Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, and all the other things women had to do to stay sane and a woman. They did largely without complaint, always without remorse, frequently without encouragement, but always urging us on, because he may not come when you call, but he always comes on time. And we have to be ready for any number of calls, to lead hundreds of slaves to freedom, to report a lynching, to pilot an airplane, to guide 9 children through a murderous mob, to sculpt, to write novels and plays and poems, to dance all over Paris and defeat the Nazis with our courage of the Rainbow Tribe, to sing arias and those soul-cleansing blues, to do anything we are called to do, because nobody is better than you. And we believe that because of the conviction in their voices urging us on. What we accept, the love, the challenge, the hope they offered, the necessity to remember, the vision to follow in their footsteps while blazing new trails. What we miss, the sight of those black women walking down sidewalkless streets, carrying brown bags full of groceries, or leftover winter clothes in summer, or summer clothes in winter, chiding us for missing church, applauding us for schoolwork or the recital, acknowledging some small deed we did, finding something good and uplifting to say, urging us on. I went through my life not learning how to, not allowing myself to cry. And now, a mouse got stuck in my bathroom and it got killed. And I saw the little mouse. I said, oh, no, no. I just about cry about anything now. Once Mommy died, because my mother died in June and my sister died 3 weeks later in July, and then my aunt died that October, and I had a duty. And I think that that's one thing that the younger generation doesn't know, and I'm not complaining about that, but duty is an important word. And my duty was to bury them, and that's what I had to do. I had to make sure that everybody was buried. That was my duty. And so I'm not going to be allowed to stand there and cry or be upset. I had to do it. And then when everything got done, I ended up writing a book called A Good Cry, because I finally realized, well, I need to cry, because if I don't, my doctor said that I'm a black woman, so doctor, this is the truth, and I know that some of us are white in this room, but if you're a black woman and you go to the doctor, the first thing he's going to say, and some of us are old enough to know it, you eat too much salt. That's the first thing you have to hear. And my doctor's bad as all the rest of them. I like him, he's cute, and I listen to him. But Gregory is cute. But it's like you eat too much salt. And I said, Gregory, what's wrong with me? And I'm having a seizure, is that I keep too much in. He said, no, you eat too much salt. I said, Gregory, I just gave you, and this I said, I just gave you something really important. I gave you a disease name, or whatever you want to call it. If I were you, I would write down everything that happens to me, since you're my doctor, and I would call it the Nikki. And I would put it in a book, and I would sell it, and you'll make a fortune. You start going around, sure, everybody, I got the Nikki, and then you get a pill. But no, I had a seizure, and that's what Gregory did, and so I was right, but what I needed to do was cry. And so once I learned to cry, I don't have seizures, but now I sit in front of a group of people that I don't know, and I'm like, oh. No, you think about those women, and those are great women, because they had all of the leftovers, whether it was the leftovers made quilts, or the leftovers gave us the clothes, and they would say how nice we looked, and somebody's leftover. When we went to school, we had leftover books. And the books were all, now you all, integration, I think the only thing integration did was give you clean new books. But we had books that people, had written in and stuff. We had, and our mother was, oh, look, that's a good idea there. And they tried to make it all right. And they came through making everything all right. And so our obligation was to continue making it all right. And I think we've done a heck of a fine job. And I went to Gee's Bend a long time ago, and I don't know if any of you have been down to Gee's Bend. It's in Alabama. Speaking of, somebody was speaking of Appalachian Trail, and Gee's Bend is down there, and they make quilts. And I went to Gee's Bend the first time because you wanted to see those people and talk to them and stuff. And they had really beautiful quilts. And you could have bought a quilt at Gee's Bend like $100 or less. And I've made mistakes in my life, and I'll admit that. I don't have a problem with that. But one of my biggest mistakes was not buying a quilt. Because when they finally discovered, the Smithsonian finally, they discovered jeans, they're not even for sale now. And I'm so sorry. If you're ever at the Smithsonian, they have, you'll see the quilts of Gee's Bend. They're just beautiful. And you have to, it's not to the exclusion, really, of anybody else, but there's just no way not to like black women. I just think, really, we're just wonderful. And we are. They can take anything and make it beautiful and make you know that it's beautiful. And they take us and they make us think we're wonderful, and that whatever it is that we're doing, how proud they are of us. And I could tell, I taught for 35 years at Virginia Tech, and I used to tease my students. I could always tell the students who went to church and the students who didn't. Because the students who went to church would always, one, you could hear them, because my name is Tom Jones. I mean, you could hear them, and whatever when they're reading a poem or something, they're giving it out. And then the kids that didn't go to church, they all mumble. And I would say that to them, you need to go to church. And it's not about what you believe or what you don't believe, but you learn. Because in church, I was Baptist. In church, every Sunday was something. Aunt's Day, Uncle's Day, Mother's Day, Father's Day. Every day was something. And you had to stand up and recite, right? Or if you had talent, you had to sing, but you had to do something. And so you got used to being in front of people, which was very good. And so when people look at my generation and say, how did you all get in those marches? How did you do that? It's because we were used to being in front, and we were not afraid. But as the song says, we also were leaning on the everlasting arms. And so we knew that somehow it was going to be all right. And I think that that's what they're missing. They don't have anything to believe in. And I think it's a damn shame that they really ought to take a step, go to church. They don't have to be Baptist, but you have to be, and I'm not against Catholics, by the way. And I'm not, but the Catholics don't make enough noise. They don't. They don't. But I went to Episcopal schools. I went to St. Simon's till my 8th grade. But Episcopals don't make enough noise either. But on Sunday, I had either the AME or I had the Baptist church, depending on what city I was in. And you get that and you get used to it. And it gives you something when you're trying to get something done. It lets you know that you're not alone, that you are never alone. And that's what church is supposed to do. And when I think about, and then I'm gonna quit talking about black people because I like it, but when I think about what these people, what they did coming out of slavery, they didn't have any money, they didn't have anything, and they got together, it would be a nickel, a dime, and a quarter, and they built the church. And then it'd be a nickel, dime, and a quarter, and they built the schools. And then it'd be a nickel, dime, and a quarter, and they get the store where they could bring their sweet potatoes and stuff in. And this is incredibly wonderful. These are great people. And I can understand why people are jealous of us and why they like to, I can, and it is jealousy when you see that the people are complaining. It is jealousy because we are kind. And we have welcomed everybody. We let people sing our songs, and they cheated us out of our money. We let people take our recipes, and they cheated us out of our book. I mean, but we're nice people, and everybody should pay attention to the black person in your life. And that's what, I just want to recommend that. I want to read a poem that always makes me cry, so I'm going to try to not cry. But speaking of quilts, and I never figured out the verb on this. I don't know if I have cancer or if I had cancer. I never, and Gregory doesn't know either. And he said, "Did you wake up?" You know, he talks like that. "Well, did you wake up?" And I said, "Yeah, Gregory." He said, "Well, then you're alive. It's okay." And that's the way he thinks, you know. And I actually pay him to hear this, but it's amazing. And I can tell you one other thing that might be helpful to some people. Gregory says, and he is a real doctor. He went to a real doctor's. And he says, if you have two, you can lose one. So I think he's right. So when my first cancer was described, it was a lung cancer. And his position was, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "Greg, I'm a PhD, you're the MD." And he said, "Well, you got two, we'll just take that one out, you'll be okay." So we took my left lung out. And eventually, the last 5 years, I had a problem with my right breast. And so that was, you know, and he said, "I'm not going to ask you because I know." I said, "Gregory," he said, "just take it off. He said, "At your age, what you going to do with it anyway?" He said, I can't believe that's the truth. I can't believe how Gregory talks to me, but that's the truth. But I had to say, in all fairness to God, God is good, because I got a left lung missing and a right breast, which keeps me balanced. And so, you know, so you have to find what you're thankful for. But I wrote a poem that I love a lot. It's because it's a quilt, and quilts are so important. When my first cancer was described, when the lung cancer, a girlfriend of mine who lives in Alabama called her mother and said, "Nikki has cancer," and her mother made a quilt and sent it to me, and put it over me. I don't know what she did. I don't know who she prayed to or what, but I'm still here, and it's 13 years later, so I'm delighted. every little thing, you know. Like a fading piece of cloth, I am a failure. No longer do I cover tables filled with food and laughter. My seams are frayed, my hems falling, my strength no longer able to hold hot and cold. I wish for those first days when just woven, I could keep water from seeping through, repealed stains from the tightness of my weave, dazzle the sunlight with my reflection. I grow old, though pleased with my memories. The task I can no longer complete are balanced by the love of the task gone past. I offer no apology, only this plea. When I am frayed and strained and drizzled at the end, please someone, cut a square and put me in a quilt that I might keep some child warm and some old person with no one else to talk to will hear my whispers and cuddle near. That's my time. I won't get invited back and say, oh yeah, she cries all the time. But I do love that poem so much. It's just one of my favorites. Because you change a lot, and we're supposed to do a Q&A, so I don't want to keep you, but I mean, any longer than you want. I mean, but you change as you grow older. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you. And one of the things you have to do is not be afraid of contradicting yourself. And any writer, especially poets, novelists don't. Novelists do the same crap because they usually have, you know, a group of people writing the novels for them, actually. I know a lot of novelists. They do. They have a lot of people that help them. But poets have this poem, and then 10 years later, that poem. I mean, it goes like that. And so what you're really doing, at some point, you're going to be 20 years older. And when that happens, there's going to be a contradiction. And so you probably noticed, and I'm sorry about that, I have to get a new pair of glasses, but I don't really memorize my poetry. Some of it I know enough to be able to follow, but I don't memorize it because if I memorized it, I would try not to contradict it. And if you're trying not to contradict, then what you're doing is repeating yourself. And I know a lot of singers, and I like a lot of singers. I have good friends who are a lot of singers. But one of the problems with singers is that they end up singing the same song the same way because they say, well, that's what, I talked to Rhea about it. Aretha's our sorority sister. And we talked about, you know, why did you do that? And, you know, go do something. Well, they want to hear it. Well, the hell with them. No, the door was open when they came in, door's open when they go out. You ought to do what makes you happy, because otherwise you're really destroying yourself and you're destroying your art. And of course, Prince did the same thing because he was taking, Prince was not a drug addict, as most of you know. He was taking painkillers. And he was doing that because he was still trying to wear high heel shoes and dance. But Prince was a great musician. He could have sat down at the piano. And I felt the same way about Prince. You know, honey, don't do that. Go out there and do what you want to do. It doesn't matter what they think. What matters is what you give what you have to give in the way that you have to give it. And you're not keeping them in. The door is always, and you have to remember that as an artist, the door is open. And you hope that you made sense, but if you don't, you're happy. And you're the first person that has to be happy. And you have to keep that in mind, that you did the best you could do at what you wanted to do. And that's what you do. And that's what life is all about. And one day you won't be able to do anything, and that'll be okay. That's why I like Elizabeth. My son didn't like her. He said that I think he's just being mean because she's the queen. But he's like, well, I don't like the way she ran. Well, I did. And I noticed that everybody said she wasn't educated. Did you notice how, when you were listening to that, she wasn't educated? She was well educated. She just didn't go to Oxford. She just didn't go to Eton. She just didn't hear that stuff that you all hear. But she was well educated because she helped run the world, and she did a good job, and it's going to change. But that's what you want to be free to do the best that you can do, and to know that that's what you are. So they say that we do a Q&A. Actually, actually, I don't know why we say Q&A, because I don't have an answer. We can do a Q and C. Question and comments, you know, something like that. Just to be on the safe side, I like that. I like the poem, so yeah, this is good. I was born in the Congo. I walked to the Fertile Crescent and built the Sphinx. I designed a pyramid so tough that a star that only glows every 100 years falls into the center, giving divine, perfect light. I'm Dad. I sat on the throne drinking nectar with a rock. I got hot and sent an ice age to Europe to cool my thirst. My oldest daughter is Nefertiti. The tears from my birth names created the night. I am a beautiful woman. I danced on the forest and burned out the Sahara Desert. With a pack of goat's meat and a change of clothes, I crossed it in 2 hours. I'm a gazelle. So swift, you can't catch me. For a birthday present, when he was 3, I gave my son Hannibal and elephants. He gave me Rome for Mother's Day. My shirt clothes, they were on. My son Noah built Newark, and I stood proudly after him as we sailed on a soft summer day. I turned myself into myself, and with Jesus, then intoned my loving name. All praises, I am the one who would save. I sowed diamonds in my backyard. My bowels deliver uranium. The filing for my fingernails are semi-precious jewels. On a trip north, I caught a cold and blew my nose, giving oil to the Arab world. I am so hip, even my errors are correct. I sailed west to reach east, and had to round off the earth as I went. The hair from my head thin and gold was laid across 3 continents. I am so perfect, so divine, so ethereal, so surreal, I cannot be comprehended except by my permission. I mean, I can fly like a bird.